Hey everyone, welcome back to French Creek Farmhouse. I'm Kristi.
I'm Rob.
And today's project is we're going to be rebuilding our sunflower patch. So that's the area that you can see right here behind us. And this is the area that we used last year that we're going to actually be tearing down completely and totally rebuilding it.
Last year was our first year we did it, so we kind of had to get we kind of got creative as we were building it, and added extra fencing and added this and added that because we noticed things that weren't working. But this year we want to make it better and bigger.
Okay, so we're starting the project by demoing the old sunflower bed, which means taking off the clips that attach the livestock fencing to the T-posts, pulling out the water lines, pulling out the T-posts. We actually have to cut out a little bit of sod because we're extending the beds longer, and we want to till that in, and then we'll add new compost and create the new walkways and reset the irrigation and then replant brand new beds. So let's go over last year's bed and let us show you the changes that we're going to be making this year. And when we first started out, we thought that livestock fencing was going to be sufficient to keep out the main predator that we were focused on, which was the deer. We have a lot of deer pressure in our area, so we put up this 2x4-inch livestock fencing thinking that would be good enough. And we lost our first two successions of sunflowers because it wasn't the deer that we had a problem with last year. It was the bunnies and the field mice. So then we decided to reinforce the livestock fencing, and we used a fine mesh bird net. And we put that around the inside edge of the livestock fencing to kind of deter keep those critters out. Okay, so sun's up, it's on the beds now, so it's definitely getting warmer out. So I'm going to help Rob get the sod marked off of what needs to be cut off. So we use this landscape paint, and it just comes in like a little roller. We'll show you how to use it. It's super easy. Basically, you just place it onto the ground and pull the trigger as you're walking along, and it makes a line. You do want to, we had to kind of help ours because the paint can wouldn't sit in it quite properly, so we put a little piece of scrap wood in there to make it so that it tipped properly when you pulled the trigger. It's kind of a cheap little tool, so they're maybe not perfect. We might have just gotten a little bit of a wonky one, but we use it a lot when we're needing to mark off areas to cut, or just different places on the ground that you might want to be able to mark off. So we'll do that so that Rob can start being able to dig that out before it gets too much hotter, and we'll keep on working on the T-posts as we go. Okay, so this is really pretty easy. All you do is put the wheel on the ground, and it's going to make a paint line just to the left of the wheel, essentially, and you just walk along with the wheel along the ground in a line. So it's going to obviously make a paint mark wherever you're walking, so you do want to try to walk as straight as possible. In the past, we've used like rope to line it out. This time, you can't probably see it on the camera, but we just made 3 dots. So I'm just going to try to line up those points as I walk and get as close as we can, because we can kind of adjust it later, like when we go and till this under and everything. So all I do is just pull this trigger right here and walk in that line. That's it.
And I'll be honest, when we first got this, I was like, this is not needed. This is kind of silly. We don't need something like this, because we were basically cutting out grass for our beds over there. And once we got it and used it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is wonderful. It made a big difference when I was doing the work. So and it's so easy. So I've just simple thing, but it made such a big difference.
Yeah, it makes the job go faster, and if you need to know exactly where you're marking something off, I mean, it's super easy to do. It's a cheap tool, definitely, and I've linked it down in the description below.
It's worth it.
Okay, so this year's patch is going to have 2 beds, just like last year, with a narrow walkway down the middle. The beds are going to be slightly wider. We're going to go to 2 3-foot beds. They're going to be longer as well, so we get a little bit more usable space out of it. And that way we'll be succession planting, and so we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on in the video. That walkway will be fairly narrow, just like it was last year, because we're trying to maximize how much space we have, and you can kind of squeeze through. But what we found last year was that we planted our beds right up to the livestock fencing on the outside, so we only had the walkway down the middle. Reaching across 3 feet when you're transplanting, because that is what we ended up doing after we found that direct sowing, while it was effective, the plants were coming up, transplanting made so much more sense for us, and the blooms came faster. So this year, that is the only way that we're doing it, is we're just starting them indoors and transplanting them out. And so we want to have space on both sides of the beds, you know, walkway down the middle and then down the sides as well, so that we can access the bed from 2 sides. Easier for transplanting, easier for harvesting. They're gonna be narrow walkways, but narrow is better than nothing.
Yeah, because it got to, basically we were practicing our yoga poses when we were trying to get in there and trying to figure out how to get the flowers without damaging other ones. It was just, it was crazy.
We're gonna pause for a Band-Aid break now.
So, got blisters coming in quickly on my pinkies.
Yeah.
I think the gloves, the rubber lining, is kind of rubs. And so a couple times I've just kind of like slipped, and yeah, it's the fastest I've ever seen a blister form.
Which one?
Well, this is the bad one. This is the worst one. I'm going to try to stop. I'm basically trying to stop it from spreading, if possible, or getting worse.
I'm not that kind of doctor, but I frequently am.
I've never gotten blisters this fast with all my runs and all my hikes. This one's not as bad, but you can see something.
Okay, so Rob's been working really hard on getting those T-posts in. We use 6-foot T-posts, but we need our fencing to be 8 feet tall. So the way that we're going to do that, because using a taller T-post is certainly one of the options, but it makes it so much more difficult to pound those in. And so we really don't want to use anything taller than 6 foot if we don't need to, is that we pound in the T-posts and then we attach some lumber to those T-posts to actually extend the height for the bird netting. So it's just kind of, it's a less expensive and less labor intensive way for us to make our fencing taller temporarily for the sunflower season. So last year we did the exact same thing, but the problem that we had is when we used the lumber to make basically like a canopy over the top and we put the bird netting on, the sharp edges of the lumber eventually wore away at the bird netting and caused it to break. So we don't want to encounter that again. And so what we're doing this year as an experiment is we picked up a piece of pipe insulation, which just basically is like a foam noodle. So you could probably pick these up at the dollar store or somewhere less expensive. But we're going to cut little pieces and attach them to the end of each 1x2 board to make it nice and cushiony and make it possible, hopefully, for the netting to just sort of float over the top without getting caught on the sharp edges of the wood. So what we'll need to do now is prep all of those 1x2 pieces of lumber and then get them all attached to the T-posts, and then we'll circle with fencing and finally put the bird netting over the top. So big chore. We might not get it all done this morning, so we might get part of it done today and then wait until tomorrow morning when it's cool again, but we're getting close. We got a little bit of a start working on putting up the fence, but it was really hot and we were running into some obstacles. So we waited till the sun went off the bed so that we could work when it's a little bit cooler. So what happened along the way as we started to put the fencing up is that, the ground isn't like perfectly flat and level in all directions. And we really wanted to avoid cutting the fence and creating opportunities where critters could get in, where those cuts existed. So we're trying to wrap it around the bed, which makes things a little more difficult when you encounter any sort of unlevel surface. So what Rob was doing was, digging out sort of like a little trench to create almost like a pocket for the fence to sit down into. That was hard. We were running into a lot of roots.
A ton of roots, a ton of big rocks. And the bed's actually kind of built into this slight hill, which means that we have to dig down kind of the same depth of the hill, so it's not going to.
I mean, it's maybe a few inches, so I don't know that I would call it a hill, but there's definitely a grade that is happening there.
It's a hill when you're trying to dig down.
It's a hill when you're digging in the sun in the heat of the day. There's definitely a hill. So when we got to the back, what we're trying to prevent is that if we don't dig the fence down, then the fence is going to bow out on the side. And so we're having to, in the back part of the bed where the hill is to dig down even further and wrap it around. So we got to, basically around halfway, a little better than halfway around the bed. And that's where we stopped because it was too hot. We were kind of feeling burned out on it. And so now that it's cooler, we're going to try to continue. Rob's dug a little bit more to see if it's deep enough now for us to fit. we finished with our 6-day build of our new sunflower patch. 6 days to build, 7 days if you include transplanting out our baby sunflowers. And I'm happy with it.
Yeah, it was a lot of work, but it looks so much nicer. It's bigger. There's more room between the beds, and the structure is a little more sturdy, so it's going to do a better job, I think, keeping out the critters and the things trying to get to it. So super happy. It's a nice upgrade from last year.
Yeah, it's bigger, but it's not like big either. We can grow quite a number of sunflowers in that size of space. But it did take us 6 days to build it, and we did that because we were trying to work outside of the heat. So we would work in the early mornings or the late evenings when there was no sun on the beds, so that we weren't, cooking. It allows us to kind of break up our time and use our, the heat of the day hours doing something else, which just kind of works better for our schedule. But, I think kind of made us reflect on the idea that we kind of live in this world where instant gratification is so prevalent, and I mean, not just even prevalent, but like it's encouraged, right? And that sort of, placing value on instant gratification kind of conditions us to expect things that we want to happen really quickly. The downside of that is that it diminishes our capacity for investing ourselves and our time in things that we really want, because oftentimes those things are like a little bit out of our reach, right? Those things might take a little bit more time also. So I think that worrying about how quickly things happen can kind of keep you from getting to what you want.
And I think sometimes, just because of what's on your plate, you can't get things done always super quick.
Yeah.
So, and then we just don't try. So taking it, sometimes these small bites allows you to kind of get to that end product, even though it takes just a little small steps at a time.
Yeah. I mean, so the world kind of gives us these messages, constantly, like bigger is better, and, more is better than less, and strength in numbers. And, there's all of these messages coming at us. We're sort of inundated with that, like, go big or go home mentality. And I think when we're like starting our farm, I mean, it can be really easy to get wrapped up in that, right? Like, we could have planted, 50,000 dahlias straight out of the gate. But that would have been a bigger picture than we were able to see at the time. I think that, taking things a little piece at a time as you can do them is just as valuable, maybe more valuable, because it keeps you from getting in that paralyzed place where, the picture is so big that you can't even get started on it.
There's been a lot of times in my life where I've been kind of paralyzed when I wanted to take a big giant step. And sometimes it's just taking a little step, or, breaking it down sometimes even works, to chunk it up. And it gives me that, courage to move forward. And it helps in so many different avenues in life.
It's so totally unrealistic to expect big goals to happen overnight, too. I mean, if you're repeatedly setting unrealistic expectations for yourself, eventually you're going to stop trying because you never really feel successful. So breaking it down into something that's doable and then taking consistent steps, helps you to sort of realize that it is possible. This big thing that you're working towards can be achieved. And that's really how we've approached all of our, fixer-upper projects in our home. And then it's how we're approaching the farm now too.
Sometimes that big picture can just blow your mind, and we give up before we even try to get started.
Yeah, and I think, breaking it down, like we did the same thing with succession planting our sunflowers, right? So last year we were harvesting about 50 sunflowers a week, and this year we're going to be doing about 150 a week. But we don't plant them all at one time, right? We succession plant them every 7 to 10 days. And so that gives us a harvest that lasts all season long. I mean, if we planted them all at one time, they'd all be ripe at the same time, and that wouldn't really work, right? You'd have to have an outlet for thousands of sunflowers all at once. But if you break it up and we're consistently harvesting 150 a week, then that gives us something that we can work with for months. That requires consistent steps though, which means that we have to do our soil blocking and start our seeds every 7 to 10 days. If we miss that window of opportunity, then that's going to change, our ability to harvest. And consistency is tough because life is just not always linear. Things come up, people get sick, weather plays a big part when you're working outdoors all the time. So there has to be flexibility and, some agility on our part in order to respond quickly enough to those changes and then stay on track.
Yeah, sometimes we talked before. I like to kind of get ahead, when possible, because when that tree falls into the fence and you have to go and repair stuff, then you have a little bit room to play with. So that's just one of those, again, those random things of life that kind of interrupts that consistency somewhat.
Yeah, so there's three big ways I think that we are kind of working on consistency in terms of, building our farm. And so the first one is that we're creating systems for repeated tasks that we frequently do. And the ways, that we're kind of investing in that, well, the raised beds were a great example, right? And then irrigation is another one. So before we had irrigation, we used to, water by hand and move hoses around. And, it took so much time every day. I mean, at least an hour, 2 hours every single day to water. And now our farm is significantly larger than it was back when we were hand watering. So the investment in irrigation, the downside is that it takes time and both a time investment and a financial investment to get that going. But we're investing that time now to save the time later. And having more free time actually does equate to money, right? Because it equates to how much we can reasonably get done.
I think it kind of falls along the lines of figuring out ways to work smarter, not just harder.
Right.
So finding those little things like irrigation, where now we can free our minds and our bodies and all that stuff up with that, and then focus on other things.
Yeah, at this point in our farm, we're not making extravagant investments. We're making investments that are efficient. So we're looking for, the types of things we can invest in that create efficiencies that exceed what we put into them. And so irrigation is a really great example of that for us. And the second thing that we're doing is having really well-defined responsibilities. So, for example, Rob does all the tilling, I start all the seeds, and we really try to break up the work like that.
Which is efficient. However, when someone gets sick, it kind of can create a problem.
Yeah, I mean, we're only 2 people. So, like, for example, what happened this spring when Rob got COVID for a second time. And then I was responsible for all of the work, I couldn't both prep our beds and harvest all of our tulips and daffodils and do bouquets and, do everything on my own. So, I mean, that's a risk point for us that we're aware of.
And also, I think part of that is, do we both understand how to do the different jobs if the call comes up, the need arises, and I think understanding a little bit of that is important, but also, we having our own jobs is also, we'd be more efficient that way.
Yeah, we can't both know how to do every single task on the farm because that wouldn't be efficient either. To have a total duplication of our knowledge base doesn't really make sense either. But at the same time, we do try to cross-train to minimize some of our risk, and we're trying to implement more of that this year. So like, soil blocking and seed starting.
Soil blocking is a great example because, in the past, I learned how to do the soil blocking and can, make my way with that, but I didn't know how to do the right recipe when mixing the soil and all the different ingredients that go into that. So slowly I've been learning that, so I can kind of take part of that and take that off of her plate when it's appropriate.
So being able to sort of cross-train and figure out how to do some tasks that both of us can do is a good idea. But, to this day, I still have never used the tiller. So that's something that's maybe on the horizon.
Yeah. Which leads to another big thing is communication.
Yeah.
Is understanding, making sure we both understand what has to happen, what needs to happen today, those small bites, and then what the bigger picture is, so we know what direction we're heading into. And that includes different types of lists, talking with each other, and just making sure we're all on the same page.
Yeah, and if we're being honest about, our current investments of our time and energy into creating efficiencies, this one is the one we're spending the most time on right now. And it's not because we have poor communication, it's because we're trying to improve our communication. So, as we're trying to grow, maybe a faster pace than like our communication skills are keeping up with, right? Because there's just so many more moving pieces than we're used to. And so, what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, who's responsible for the different parts of the task. we don't have enough time in the day to sit down and walk through every single one of those details together. And so we have to try to figure out ways to implement systems that help ourselves do that, and so we're trying out lots of different ways. We have like, whiteboards and calendars and making lists, and then we have apps that we're utilizing and things like that too. But I mean, I definitely feel like that is our biggest challenge right now in terms of like what could potentially hinder our growth, is just making sure that we can stay on track with everything that needs to be done and not miss stuff. And the only way we can do that is through communicating with each other in the most efficient way possible. So here's the moral of the story, I think, when I look back at this sunflower patch build that happened over the course of 6 days, is that little becomes much when you act in faith, right? And so what that means to me, I mean, that's like kind of a mantra right now. And what that means is that if you have a big dream for, how you want your life to be, and it doesn't really matter what it is, whether it's like, you're wanting to build your dream house, you're wanting to start a farm, you want to start a business, you want to run a marathon, whatever the thing is that you sort of have this calling to do. If you're putting it off because you think that you have to have it all figured out and do it all at once, don't put it off, okay? Because number one is you got to always act before you're ready. That's just the only way that you're going to be able to do things. But then chunk it down into something that's manageable.
Yeah, you're never going to have it all figured out. And all that's important at that moment is that next step. What do you have to do today? Obviously, you need to kind of try to make those larger plans a little bit, but ultimately is what has to happen today. And those are usually these smaller steps.
So you just have to have faith in your vision, right? Little becomes much when you're acting in faith. If you have faith in what you have as a vision for what your life is supposed to be, what you feel like it's meant to be for, and then you consistently take small steps in that direction, you will accomplish quite a bit over time, because the time is going to pass anyway. So you might as well make those small steps forward rather than putting it off and waiting because you can't do it all at once.
That's what we're trying to do here with our adventures in farming, and we hope you're enjoying watching it.
And if you are enjoying watching it, we hope that you'll like this video and drop us a comment down below to let us know. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss a future episode. And those little actions really make a huge difference to us in helping us grow our channel and our farm. So until next week, we hope that you're digging deep, cultivating big dreams, and striving for a life well lived. See you soon.
Thanks for watching.
Smile. And not weirdly.
Come on.
Okay, here we go. Okay. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Okay. So,
Did I leave my teeth?
a little bit. Did you brush your teeth?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but I had something.
Should I stop recording?
No.
I can do this. So,
Are you laughing at?
you're doing like a weird smile. I don't know. This looks fake. Okay.
What kind of